to Andrew and Phil. Are you joined, or are they separate deputations? Okay, feel free. You know, guys, the usual rule is 10 minutes, but if you want to, if you want questions at the end or anything, that's included in the 10 minutes. I'll be reasonably liberal, but just that's a general.
My understanding from these submitters, Vicky, was that they had made a deputation request separately.
Okay, I'll be incredibly liberal. Right, okay. Okay, we're in your hands.
The first two deputations we made regarding the feasibility of area-wide mitigation, not just in our area as an example, but Phil and I will talk in sort of a broader context as well too. It's just coming back to the report that's coming through from the council staff, and we've all been privy to it. And to say we're a bit disappointed is putting it mildly. Again, just a quick recap, just within our area too, we were quite surprised just looking at the presentation we made in the geotechnical advice we had that area-wide mitigation in our area was highly practical. Just draw your attention briefly to the slide. The houses are below. The yellow line is Captain Thomas Track. That's on Council Reserve. The bluffs are circled in blue. A lot of you will have already seen this before. Again, just from the vantage point from the sides, the yellow lines, the dotted lines demark sort of the area we're referring to, about 20 houses. Our house is outlined in red. And it's quite straightforward for us. We've had our S124 lifted, so then we're back at our house now, so that's good news. And again, though, what comes into context is that when we originally made this presentation, this is why it's a similar slide, is that we made it on the basis that we were the only house within that side of the road, about 40 houses, who actually were still seeking to return back to our house and seeking rock protection for our house, which we're perfectly happy to move forward. We just think that there's a missed opportunity here. And again, it's a shame to have to keep coming back to this topic. What was good news last time is that the mandate went out to the council staff to review the feasibility of area-wide mitigation. What we were very surprised about was the fact that our area was completely missed. And as far as we read in the report, one of the key criteria was that we were the only private homeowner, and because rock protection funding provided by the council was available, therefore there was no purpose in looking at our area, whereas our argument from the very beginning was simply put, if there is a mandate, if it is feasible, regardless who owns the houses, to protect that area, then there is the opportunity for the council and Sarah to recoup costs. And because of that, we are extremely disappointed, because the remit that went out ended up showing that we were completely bypassed, and other areas were shown to be not meeting the cost-benefit threshold. Just briefly, before we move into the bigger context here, again, the area-wide mitigation review, we need to be put in context relating to our area. There has comments been from the professionals here, the council staff, about the tiredness of our neighbourhood. We now have significant drainage and ongoing maintenance issues, which you may have heard about in Sumner, including leading to flooding, and that's relating to our neighbours who are currently owned by Sarah, and I'm having to do a fair bit of work to clean their drains. I'll talk about the S124 status in just a moment relating to our neighbours. This is a quick snapshot of our houses around. These are our neighbours, and this is relating to how tired the area looks. I know a lot of areas around Christchurch may look tired, but these houses, yeah, they need some tidying up, but they're actually in good nick. What was I there? So, it comes down to sort of put in perspective the original request and how it's been interpreted by council staff. And one of the things we'd asked the councillors to put back to the staff is to either revisit the original request in a more open-minded manner, and second of all, just in the context of if our S124 was reversed, maybe some simpler options available are that there's no one who's standing up for the houses below us. I'm not saying that they actually have emotions or anything and need to be stood up for, but simply that if our S124 is lifted and there's immediately 5 houses below us that should in theory have their S124 lifted, which in theory would mean that they're viable to be put back on the market, and Christchurch City Council, and maybe Sarah too, can start looking to reclaim some costs from those, possibly without even having to, put an extensive outlay into putting area-wide mitigation in. So I guess there's maybe some possible solutions to think about, some simpler ones in the early phase prior to maybe looking at spending more money there. And I guess probably that's what we were looking at putting back to, is either to consider rejecting the report, asking council staff to revisit in a broader perspective, which is a bit frustrating, and/or, for example, referring on to perhaps GeoVert, who was involved initially way back when, for a process of peer review and considering whether it is feasible. Probably at this point, ask Phil to comment as well too.
Would anyone like to ask some questions about what Andrew's presented, or would you like me to just... Okay.
I just wanted to go back to the S124. That has been removed from your property.
That's correct,
right?
yes.
So the previous slide said if the S124 has been removed from your property, your argument is that quite logically then the properties below...
Yes.
Can you go back to that slide before, just so I can have a look at the wording of that? Because I'm no engineer and don't know the area that well. So do you know what the logical argument is to lift the houses? Sorry, if our S124 has been reversed, right, yeah. So what's the issue with that? What are they saying is the problem with the houses below
Simply
if yours has been lifted?
Because our house has the S124 lifted.
Right.
And that in order to go through that process, you need to apply to MBIE for that process determination. So it needs to be done on a house-by-house basis.
Sure.
And now that those houses have been, reacquired or acquired by the Crown, or at least the property, then I guess our perspective is that you're sitting on an asset. Christchurch City Council and Sarah are sitting on an asset that simply needs someone to step up and represent them in the same way.
But those S124 still remain on those houses
correct.
below you, and your argument is if yours has been removed, it's quite logical that that one should.
Absolutely.
But because they're not being lived in, no one is requesting for the S124 to be lifted.
Yes.
Thank you.
MB determined that Andrew's house... Houses below him obviously will be in the same...
Thank you. I just wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Thank you. And who's the owner?
Sarah.
Sarah.
Probably the overall.
Yeah, actually, I'll go to that,
That's
and maybe,
a bad one.
what do you think, that one there?
That one there.
Yeah, so our house is in red, and so the line, there's you could argue there's two tiers. Ours is the uppermost along, there's 4 or 5 houses along that line, and then below there's, onto Lower Sumner Vale, you've got, I believe it's 34, 32, 28, and then it sort of wraps around into Finsarby. And so you've got number 1 on the very corner, that's green, that's Neil and Bev's house. Then you've got 3A, B, and 5. So argue within that lower threshold, you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 houses in theory that should have their S124 lifted, and that's a considerable asset.
On a technical basis, all of those houses within that yellow precinct there are subject to the same risk and have the same slope characteristics. Andrew's house indicates that all of those houses are actually at no risk from rockfall.
Yeah, and I guess I put in context that technically a determination would need to be done for the houses adjacent to us to really get an honest, review about the threat to each individual house. So I didn't really want to extend it to the houses beside us, but I guess logically you could say it's reasonable that they would have an equal chance to have their S124 reversed. So again, you may extend that you're still sitting on a simple asset prior to investing a lot of money, and that's crudely where that red line which was put forward to us on Captain Thomas by Geoscience New Zealand, that's the length of the bund they proposed for less than $1 million. And just in context, I think you still share the amount for demolition, and those costs arguably, I think the tenders are about 25,000. It's reasonable to assume they'll be more expensive on the hillside. So you're probably looking for about 20 houses, over $500,000 for demolition. So our argument again is, if you're going to spend the money, why don't you spend it recouping those costs?
Can I just ask you, Andrew, a wee bit more about the costing? So, I understand from the report and from what you said that the reason that your home has not been included in the cost-benefit information we have from council staff is that it's on its own, and they considered cost-benefit, or an assumption was that it would need to be more than one house before it was actually included.
But that's what I read from the report,
Right.
yes.
So what I'm wondering is, have you obtained or any estimated costs to actually provide mitigation by way of a bund or a fence for your property individually?
Yes.
Can you tell us what that might be?
That's $150,000 currently. So we have site access challenges, being on a slope. So that requires.
Yeah.
So it balances out, because we could go for a fence option which would allow easier transfer and placement of the protection, but it would require more frequent, ongoing and costly maintenance over time, as opposed to putting a bund in place. We're actually looking at a two-tier bund system, because there's a couple of banks already cut in above our house, and we've had advice that if those are sort of reinforced, then their profile is lower, but more than sufficient to absorb the energy needed. And again, that just means that we need a digger up behind the house in order to achieve that.
But the owner of behind your house is?
It's ours right up to Captain Thomas.
I see.
And Captain Thomas, we assume, is owned by council. It would be the obvious place to put protection.
Yeah, and again, that's maybe part of the context as well too, is that there is, as far as I understand, an agreement where land adjacent to council reserve is returned to the council. And I guess maybe if it's not off the top, to suggest that the land is returned with the housing intact, the housing stock intact, without it being demolished, leaving it to the council to make a decision on what to do with that.
Thanks, Henry.
Any other questions? So my apologies for being late this morning. So, Phil?
It'd be good to hear from Phil Elmy as well, because Phil also requested a separate deputation. So we haven't heard Phil's case yet, so I just wondered if we
Yeah,
might
sorry,
still hear
I hadn't quite caught up with where we'd got to. So, Phil, would you like to make your presentation now?
Yes, thanks. I'm here to say to this council, please reject this report. It's not what was asked for by the Mayor and the Port Hills councillors in the first place. It lacks any sort of technical rigour. It lacks completeness. And please go back and get this reviewed by such people as GeoVert and McAferry, who are world experts in this region. That they have indicated they are willing to do so. Secondly, I'd like to say about the cost-sharing agreement between the government and the council. Sarah's saying that they're not going to make land available for rockfall protection, and that they will not enter into any rockfall protection agreements which save houses. To me, it's reneging on the cost-sharing agreement that they made. Clause 3.3 clearly says that if solutions can be found, then it will be revisited. Clause 3.2 is inconsistent with what the council resolved last year. The resolution that the council made was that council would get all the land adjacent to its reserves, and what was actually agreed was that the council was only going to get 50% of the land that was adjacent to its reserves. This is all wrong. We need to revisit this with urgency.
Has anyone got any questions for Phil? Phil?
Can I ask you the same question? If for example, mitigation was put in low sense, you've got something, but can you give us the costs or estimated costings of any further mitigation behind your own property?
Okay, well, I can speak about my property with some certainty. My estimates for putting in rockfall protection for my property are in the order of $100,000. That includes land acquisition and compliance costs. Your staff's report came up with 2.7 million, or 2.9 million, I'm sorry. I don't get it. But what has been proposed in the report is slope remediation above our house and then a fence with ongoing life costs. The obvious solution for our house is in fact a bund, and there is no point in doing any slope remediation, which they have included a cost of $800,000 for. It just lacks any technical rigour at all. That's $100,000 to 2.9 million. That's a factor of 29. What's going on? It's wrong.
Yanni?
Thank you. One of the concerns seems to be from some people, possibly the Minister, that there's a liability issue. So the red zone in the Port Hills addresses the liability issue. Can you just tell us, from your point of view, as I understand it, actually, there's rocks on council-owned property that affect some of the properties in the red zone. So can you just help me understand, maybe comment on, in terms of liability, regardless of whether people take the voluntary offer or not, where does that sit and who's responsible?
The council will not absolve itself of its liability in this issue. The council clearly have liability for their rocks. The lack of rockfall protection means that although some properties have been bought out by Sarah and therefore the problem has gone away in that regard, there are still many properties that are subject to rock roll from council-owned land which are not going to be protected and could still potentially be damaged and people killed. The lack of rockfall protection is an ongoing problem for the council. With regard to our property, we still contend that although we are very willing to cooperate with the council in getting rockfall protection in place, we contend that it is an issue that the council needs to address. We're not going away. We're not taking the red zone offer.
Just so I'm clear, so basically, as I understand what you're saying, is if we do nothing to mitigate the rockfall risk, then we actually increase our liability.
Well, yes, that's right, because you're clearly well aware of the issue, way more so than before the earthquakes. Yes.
Are there any other questions? Right, thank you very much. What I'm going to propose that we do is that we move to item 24 on the agenda so that we can deal with this matter straight away while you're all still here. Thank you. Thanks very much.